Hello everyone, this is Rabbi Dr. Yosef Jeffrey Glanz, and this is part 2 of my 3-part presentation. If not sure I mentioned this in part 1, don't think I did. If you want to reach out to me and contact me about any question, any follow-up, I am available. I have a number of ways of contacting me. My USA number is 718-880-6701. My Israeli cell number is 052-735-0979. I have an email address at YOS, that's short for Yosef, YOSGLANZ and my website is www.jeffreyglanz, one word, JEFFREY Glanz, GLANZ.com. Now, my major premise in part 1 was that although attending a shiur, giving a shiur, is a great schus, there are ways to improve the experience. You can improve the experience so that the audience in particular comes away with something more substantive of the content of that shiur that was given. Now, the question now is, what's the better way? Research in education, in chinuch, teaches us, and this is the most critical point I can make, is that engagement is the key. That is, engaging our audience. Now, actually, audience is a bad word. The better word is participants. See, an audience just sits there and listens, whereas participants participate in the experience. Without active engagement, then the presenter is not teaching. He or she is just giving over information, just presenting, just talking. Now, if you accept the simple premise of engagement, what are some ways we can actively engage our participants, our audience? Now, this certainly requires a change of mindset to think of them as participants, not audience. Now, some people might critically say, well, people don't come to a shiur, they don't want to be engaged. Well, I feel they've been conditioned not to want to be engaged, and therefore they're willing to sit there, and they may even tell you, just talk to me, don't engage me. That's because they've not been taught and experienced the thrill of engagement. Because I can certainly guarantee you, and this is backed by research, that they will leave with more content, more understanding, more sipuk, more satisfaction after having been engaged. And that's basic research, it's basic common sense. Most of us are not auditory learners, as I mentioned. Most of us are visual learners, and by actively engaging, then we're more likely to come away with something more substantive. Now, so without engagement, you cannot expect people to learn. And people want to be engaged if they're engaged properly. Now, what I'm saying is that you can become a teacher by doing 3 things. Not a presenter, a teacher. 1, actively engaging your participants. 2, doing CFU, checking for understanding. And 3, providing feedback. These are 3 of the most critical elements in any teaching experience. I would posit that if you do not do these 3, then you're just giving over information, you're just talking, you're just presenting, you're not teaching. Teaching implies that they've learned something, and that they've learned something. Very often people hear, for example, an halachic lecture, and then if they're not engaged, if you don't check for understanding, if you don't give feedback, they may walk out as clear as you think your shiur was. They may come out with the wrong halacha, with the wrong inference. And therefore, Teaching involves 3 steps, which I will talk about: engaging your participants, checking for understanding, CFU, and providing feedback. Now, I understand that doing so is radically changes the way we give shiurim. And some of you may prefer just give over for a variety of reasons. Now, by the way, there are situations where I just want to hear the shiur. If it's a high lecture, if it's a high level audience, and there's a great gadol or a great inspirational speaker, I may just want to hear them. Of course, I'm not expecting, if the Chafetz Chaim came to us, that I expect him to engage us. I want to hear his chidushim. But that's reserved for a miyut of situations. Most shiurim, most situations, I think we need to engage our audience. And by just giving over, that's called in education the banking concept of education, where students are the bank, passive, and we simply give over, we deposit information into the bank. It's like my father, Olav Shalom, used to say, sometimes when I learned in yeshiva, what goes in one ear, out the other, because I wasn't engaged. I just sat there and listened, and I needed to be engaged. And so we want to get rid of the banking concept, where we're passively listening, but rather more actively engaged. And therefore taking away much more of the shiur, of the lecture, of the presentation. Again, there's great schar in just attending. We're raising the kedusha of giving a shiur between Mincha and Ma'ariv, and rather having people talk to each other and Chas Shalom talk Lashon Hara. So giving a shiur is important. Giving a drasha is important. However, there's a much better way when people come away with greater havana, greater understanding. So, what I'm going to talk about are 10 ways we can actively engage our audience, our participants. 2, 5 ways to do CFU, check for understanding, and ways and the importance of feedback. Now, I'm going to do most of this in part 3 of my presentation, but let me begin with an educational teaser, if you will, and save the rest for part 3. Now, I'm not going to mention Mar Makomos. Now, that's a good way of having people follow along, but they're not actively engaged, really. They're just following along. And that's a great technique that's recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, many presenters do that. And Yasher Koach. But to what extent are people actively engaged? I think there are better ways, which I'll talk about. Now, I'll give you one way of engaging your audience and save the rest of part 3. Before I do that, one of the major principles of this gisha, of this approach to education and teaching, is that by talking less, people learn more. In other words, teach more by talking less. And you'll see how that plays out when I go over these approaches. So the first technique is what's called pair and share. So if you have 7 minutes to give a shiur between Mincha and Ma'ariv, or a drush on Shabbos for 15 minutes, save 10% of the time, or 15 to 20% of the time for pair and share, where, let's say you have 7 minutes, talk for 5, do something for 5 minutes, and let them do something for 2 minutes. So one of the ways is by posing a question, or asking them to review something you've said, by turning to a neighbor and answering a question that you posed. It's called pair and share. And they're actually talking to each other. You as the presenter may, if you have time, walk around to listen, provide feedback to them as they're doing that. If you have a large audience, you can't do it to the entire audience. But again, pairing and sharing. At the end of my presentation, I'm going to provide some literature for you to read to actually learn more about how to do pair and share effectively, and what the research says about pair and share. But by working with a partner, like a mini chavrusa, to go over a question before the shiur, during the shiur, or even after the shiur. For example, I might pose, what are 2 takeaway ideas that you're going to walk away from this shiur before you leave? Turn to a neighbor and discuss it. And they do that. And then you might, before they leave, ask one or two to provide one or two ideas they took away from the halachic shiur, for example. That way you can listen to what they said, you can verify that they've come away with correct conclusions, and then perhaps provide feedback before they leave. So the first way of engaging your audience is through what's called pair and share. Part 3, I'll provide much more information. Thank you.